Good evening and welcome to this session of Bringing Law to Life. My name is Vonette and I'm a Student Experience Manager in the Law School. And this evening I am joined by Gillian Mawdsley, who will share with us this evening her insights from her varied career, beginning as a conveyancing solicitor, then logically launching into a public sector lawyer, ultimately finding her place amongst academics and in teaching. Now, the legal profession has recognized the value of diversity and inclusion, but it has been slow to foster a more inclusive environment. So equality, diversity, inclusivity, it is a regulatory objective and it's recognized in law, and the law encourages an independent, strong and diverse and effective legal profession. So in 2023, the Solicitors Regulation Authority showed that there was a slow but steady increase in diversity amongst all lawyers. So, for example, 53% of lawyers today are women lawyers, 19% are Black and minority ethnic lawyers, and 6% are disabled lawyers. But there's a significant gap still remaining for women, significantly higher proportion of lawyers working in one-partner firms, difficulty for women to gain seniority positions, and other stats show that 4.4% of lawyers are lesbian, gay, or bisexual. And there's been a drop in lawyers from lower socioeconomic backgrounds from 21% in 2015 to 18% in 2023. The Bar Council's report on race at the bar from 2021, it evidenced that barristers from ethnic minority backgrounds face systemic obstacles to building and progressing a career at the bar. And more recently, their 2024 report on diversity shows that there are still significant disparities for underrepresented groups, as we discussed from the Solicitors Regulation Authority research. So this series of talks, Bringing Law to Life, aims to increase awareness and understanding not only of the obstacles, but the opportunities and the support available for our students who may be from underrepresented groups and wish to enter the legal profession. You can use the question and answer box to post any questions for Gillian, and we'll answer them at the end of Gillian's talk. And if we don't have time to answer your questions this evening, they will be answered in the forum on Law Study Home. There's also a link to our feedback, so please do complete the feedback at the end of this session. So let's begin speaking with Gillian, and probably a good question to start with, Gillian, is what's a public sector lawyer?
A good question. A public sector lawyer is probably easiest described by what it's not. It's not a private sector lawyer. Private sector are the people who work for the firms of solicitors, and that's what I would designate a private. So anyone that's not a private would be public sector. They would probably commonly be working for government. They might be working for different organisations such as the prison service. They could be working for the CPS, etc. So they'd be working for different organisations. You might get confused because the one thing you might also get is firms or barristers who actually work for public sector organisations. Now, that's going to be more common, and one area that you might be familiar with is the post office. The post office solicitors were quite often barristers employed by the post office. Now, that can't happen in Scotland, but they might consider that they were public sector because they were actually working in a kind of for a public organisation. I would designate them as private sector lawyers, and in effect they had a client who was the post office. But hopefully public sector would generally be government and all these areas, and there are a huge variety of different posts with different organisations that the students themselves you may not have actually thought about when you're kind of looking forward to what the next steps after that great day of graduation is.
Already a useful comparative context to start our discussion. Okay, Gillian, so can you describe your career journey? How did you get to be a public sector lawyer?
Well, if somebody had asked me at the age of 17 why I was doing law, the answer had been, I have no idea, but I was told I didn't have a choice. I'm the youngest of a family of very bright academic family, actually. And it was very clear that we were going to university. I remember being very upset at the age of 8, being told I had to go to university. But leaving that aside, my mother would only entertain that I went to university to do a professional qualification. My big brother is exceptionally bright. I had a sister who fainted at the sight of blood, and my family were very annoyed that they didn't have a doctor in the family because lots of my relatives are doctors, but there was nobody there. So the joke was I was to be the doctor. And that quite suited me because I liked forensic medicine, and I quite liked a programme called Sutherland's Law, which was about Procurator Fiscal in Scotland. So I kind of wandered through my secondary career very much with the idea that I'd do medicine, but then I hit physics. I'm very mathematical, loathe physics, terribly badly taught, and I burnt my notes the day after the exam, and I basically vowed I would never open a physics book in my life, ever again, and medicine, as far as I was concerned, contained first year physics. So the choice was made for me, it was law. So that was doing law, but I really was classic Scottish product, which is one foot in front of the other, pass exams, get on with it. So that's what I did, passed exams and went to look for what we call a diploma, did the diploma and looked for a job. And I tried for Crown Office, which because I'd known about Procurator Fiscals and the CPS is the equivalent Crown Office in Scotland, but I didn't get a traineeship. I was telling Vanette this earlier, it went to 2 judges' daughters. One is now a High Court judge, the other one I don't know, but I was very upset. But lo and behold, I got a job with one of the top Scottish law firms, and they put me into conveyancing. Very mathematical, very systemic. I was good at it. I was quite happy. They found me useful because I'm very hardworking. So I stayed in it for 5 years. And then my mother said, but you didn't do law to be a private sector lawyer. A friend was on a jury, and she phoned me every night and said, that's you arguing your hind legs off to a donkey. That's you strutting about a court. And I got married by then, so I could take a drop in salary. So I applied to Crown Office. It's a bit serendipity because the day I phoned them, they told me they were advertising the next day. So I think it was meant. So off I went in my mid to late 20s to be a public sector lawyer for Crown Office. So it never looked back. Ever since then, I've done public sector work. I worked for the COPFS. I went on secondment to government and policy. That's why I have the good fortune or misfortune, Vanette. We both teach European law. That's because I did working groups in Europe on a range of criminal law and other matters. And then I ended up teaching for the Judicial Institute. I worked for the Legal Aid Board, and I ended up in policy at the Law Society of Scotland. But I fundamentally have been a policy lawyer probably since 2004.
So medicine's lost, gain for the law profession, and certainly a gain for us at the Open University. Gillian, in addition to making sure that we have fate on our side, what advice can we give to students to gain experience to make those applications?
Well, I think what I always say to students is to think about what your skills are. Some of you will have started studying with the Open University for many different reasons. You maybe just did a module once and went on. I've been you too, because after 20 years as a lawyer, as I said, I've got a very academic family. I also married to an academic. And I began to think, I've only got an ordinary degree. You don't need an honours degree to be a solicitor in Scotland. And I didn't like the fact that I was the only one that sat with the ordinary degree. By that time, distance learning came along. And lo and behold, I thought, well, I'll go and do a distance learning course in information technology and telecommunications law. Exactly what relevance that had to me, I have no idea. It was the best thing I could have done. I did the first module going, I'm not going to tell anybody about this. I'll pay for it. And if I fail, nobody knows. And I passed the first one, not as well as I'd have done at university. So again, being the academic I am, I ploughed on. I ended up with the most extraordinary marks for intellectual property that I've ever seen in anything in my life. Having told everyone it was namby-pamby, arty-farty law, who wants to do intellectual property law? And I did my dissertation, and that's what really got me into the government, because clearly the person was looking for someone that showed something different, that showed they were prepared to go and do something else. So that got me into government, which completely altered my life without realizing that very first day that I started that extra qualification. I didn't know how to use Westlaw. I didn't know how to computers. I didn't type essays. If I hadn't done all of that, I wouldn't have been employed by the Open University many years down the line, because you need a master's degree at least, and I wouldn't have had one. I wouldn't have got interviewed. So when you're doing that first day of qualification, you've no idea where it's going to take you. So just keep going. And the other thing is, don't underestimate what you do in your private life or your personal life, because I've done a lot of conference organization, a lot of events, and that used all my kind of experience with various, I was going to say minority groups that I'd worked with when I was working at the Judicial Institute. I had worked with, for instance, one of the organizations that supports Asian women who are being domestic abuse. I'd worked with all sorts of religions. And, you know, these are all opportunities for, I've worked with mental health groups. So these are opportunities that use people like yourself who may be working towards a law degree or get a law degree, but actually may not want to be a lawyer, but you just want a bit more experience. So don't and the other thing not to underestimate, and I'm kind of digressing, is I once taught a student who wanted to get into Crown Office and they didn't get an interview the first time they applied. So they asked for advice, and nothing wrong with the application. But I said, how'd you get on at school? I said, do you have any leadership? Oh, yes, I was head girl. I'm sorry, but where does it tell me in your application that you have leadership skills? And tells me, but that's not relevant. I said, I beg your pardon? You were head girl in your school and you're telling me it's not relevant to Crown Office application. I said, take a step back and look at your organisational and other ability. But I wasn't in the debating society. I said, so what? Clearly the school recognised something in you and you got to university to do law. So if nothing else, take a step back and look at what you've got. You may have skills. You may also have a background. I once taught somebody that came from a very bad abused background. She ended up as a trainee at Crown Office. A year later, she gave me a present and said, you changed my life. I never thought of Crown Office until you said, but you're a victim. Why don't you go for this Crown Office and work it directly prosecuting? So there's some ideas.
Excellent. Thank you, Gillian. Gillian, you've touched a few things in your journey, obstacles that you've overcome. How accessible, diverse is your profession?
Well, we certainly started with the questions at interviews of, well, do you have a partner? When it was illegal. So I'm old enough to have been asked that question in time it was illegal, where you wanted to sit and say, don't you dare. I've also been in the situation with a client that wouldn't stop using double entendres until I got fed up. And my partner said, oh, don't worry about it. That's just the way he is. Now, these are 1980s, 1990s. These are unacceptable practices today. So that's practices towards women. I remember going to a meeting outside of Glasgow. The client wanted to meet me at their hotel. It was a genuine meeting. I refused to go until the partner said he'd come with me. And my client sat at the meeting and said, why did you bring the partner? He doesn't know anything about the transaction. Even he couldn't see that I wouldn't go to a hotel on my own as a woman lawyer. So I would say that's not quite how diverse, but the treatment of women is like leapt forward. When I was working in private practice, one of the reasons that I was quite keen to move, I would never have got a partnership in the firm I was at. It was going to be probably another 5 years before you started seeing female partners in commercial conveyancing, because they were waiting for us to get pregnant and go off on maternity leave. Now, Crown Office was very different, because Crown Office was probably 80% women. But what I'd say about the women was that 80% were above average of most of the men. And they were in the prosecution service because it was a much easier life than working in private practice. And that remains the case in criminal law. It is easier to work for the prosecution as a female, where you get all your maternity rights and where there's some protection against being bullied. You work in private practice in the defence, and it's not the same thing at all. Basically, you want the job, you get on with it. So I think from a treatment point of view, one likes to think it's moved forward, Vanette. I don't think to women it has. I think there are greater opportunities. On the converse, you can't get pregnant as a woman and then basically treat pregnancy as an illness, because that doesn't work either. I'm not suggesting pregnancy is an illness. It's certainly a condition, but, you know, we stood outside courts and threw up. Now, I'm not saying that's right, but if you want treated equally, I'm sorry, there's times when I'm afraid it may be a bit radical, but you have to keep quiet because the world isn't fair. You know, if you pretend you can get everything, you can't. It's not right, but it's better, but it's not perfect. That's probably quite radical.
No, it's hard hitting, but it's pragmatic, Gillian. Thank you. So you've touched a little bit because you've had quite a varied career, different groups of people, different stakeholders in your line of work. Who do you work with?
Who do I work with now? Well, I now have what you call a mixed portfolio. I teach the Open University, so clearly I'm mixing with yourselves as central academics as well. But I've also done quite a bit of research myself and wrote a book on my own topic last year, for as well as writing things for the Open University and other organisations. So that's, if you like, writing an academic, very much like yourself, Annette. But I hold a couple of non-executive appointments. So I work, one of them is an NHS board, where I'm the whistleblowing champion. You can perhaps see the affinity with kind of policy-related law. But I'm also on the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission, which is very similar to the Criminal Cases Review Commission in England and Wales. And I'm also on the Judicial Appointments Board for Scotland as a legal appointments advisor. So these are what you call public sector appointments. I also, more interestingly, am an assistant registrar. That's my fun job. I do about a handful of weddings every year, employed by one of the local councils. And that is my best job. That's great. That's really great fun, because you'd be surprised how much trouble there can be at weddings. But so that's a fun job. I also, because of my legal medical background, I'm on a couple of royal colleges where Dental College, College of Surgeons and things, where I do inspections and I do bits of work. So what I'm really saying is, once you've got the transferable skills, it's amazing what kind of places. You don't get everything. And what I'd say is I went for a very bad time because of what happened in one organisation, not Crown Office, I hasten very quickly to add, and nothing to do with a lawyer. But I learned resilience and determination and commitment. So although I would totally accept, compared to most of your backgrounds, I've probably had a silver spoon, I still had my bad times where resilience and commitment and determination and applying for everything in sight and getting knocked back because interviews were foregone conclusions are a really tough way of proceeding. But all I can say is hang in there, because sometimes things come right and you come to the top again.
Excellent advice, Gillian. And, you know, our OU students have a lot of resilience when they've made it this far. Let's talk about work-life balance, Gillian. How do you describe it in your profession and in your own experience? Because you do a lot, you're busy.
Yeah, I think you've come the cropper when I've been far too busy, Vanette, in certain emails. But life-work balance, I think at this point, my son and daughter would fall about laughing. I'm afraid I'm the product of a Scottish background, which is the work ethic, but a background which is you work as hard like a little squirrel, my husband would say, where you squirrel around. I don't think I'm a good model for work-life balance sometimes, but I did tell Vanette earlier that I found pickleball. And for the first time, pickleball dominates work. It trumps it. When I say I'm going to play pickleball, I do go and play pickleball, and it don't work. And for those of you who haven't heard of it, it's the fastest growing sport in the UK. So go and look it up. It's a racket sport. But more seriously, I mean, it is difficult. In our profession, they still ask for ludicrous hours. I think it's very difficult. I mean, a lot of you are managing your time with families and a full-time job as well as your study, and I commend you. Do not underestimate that achievement. It's not always going to be 18 hours a day, and I'm not sure I ever worked 18 hours a day, but I certainly worked very hard. I'm not sure that's right, Annette, is probably the answer. When I'm not convinced that working flat out, but at least if you work flat out, then you never feel you've left a stone unturned and you've never lost an opportunity. But that could be about self-confidence and doubt. I know a number of people who've never worked as hard and probably got as far, but it wouldn't have been me, I suppose. You've got to be true to yourself.
I understand that. And, you didn't come this far to just sort of sit around and be relaxed about things either.
No, and I think what I would say is integrity is absolutely everything. The one thing I would say is if you say you're going to do it and do it to the best of your ability or face up to the fact. It's a bit like extensions. Don't pretend that you need a week if you actually need 2 weeks. Basically face up to it and get it in 2 weeks. And it's the same in a working practice. Don't say you'll do something and then do it half-heartedly and put in anything that'll do. It's not true to you. It won't get you further, and it doesn't buy integrity, and it certainly doesn't buy it from, the judicial community either.
I think that's an important aspect. Work-life balance isn't just about those external things. It's also about you being true to your inner self. Absolutely. Gillian, you had a couple of mentors on your journey. Can you tell us about them?
Well, I've had a couple of people when things weren't good who really stood out for me. In particular, when I went to work for one organisation after I'd had a really terrible time, I don't think the person I was working for realised. And I explained to him maybe a month or so, we had to share a room, a month or so afterwards what happened. And he took one look and said, but that's appalling. Who is this person? And I said, well, not naming because I couldn't, but somebody like him showed me that actually, well, he actually showed me I had the skill of developing training materials. I would never, and I kind of realized that if I'd never been into that horrible situation, never gone to work for a different organization and had this particular person, I wouldn't have realized that actually I had an ability. Well, my colleagues here may not agree, but I have developed lots of confidence materials, so I assume I'm okay. But I didn't know it wasn't just about teaching. I knew I could teach because I had done teaching for about 10 years by that point. But what I didn't realise is I had the ability to actually be able to translate the teaching into materials. And that's what we talk about mentors supporting you, and actually you realise you're learning from them and that you go off and develop. So he probably was one of the people, but there were others who, I remember one person saying to me, well, just go for the interview. And I said, but I'd need a reference from. And they said, tell them that there was a personality clash and tell them to come to me for a reference. I said, but I can't do that. You're not my last employer. He said, so what? I employed you. And that's what I did. And I got the job. And the person who I worked for at the time said, but how did you get that job? They never came to me for a reference. I said, well, they clearly didn't need to come to you for a reference, did they? And walked out the room.
Okay, Gillian, any advice for our students on finding somebody who's going to fight in their corner or is going to be a role model for them?
I think you look at what your traits that you're looking. I mean, I know from speaking to students and what inspires them. So if someone inspires you, ask them the frank question about, how they got it or what they got, and look up to, I don't mean look up to them, that's the wrong way, but look to them for advice. Most people love sharing their experiences. Lawyers are very egocentric and we love talking about ourselves. So ask, and don't be scared at the end of a tutorial. If something's inspired you, something's interested you, it may be that the tutor has to go off because they do have something else to do. But I've certainly spoken to a student, and that's another motto for coming to tutorials. Come early. A number of us do log on early. We will speak to you. And if you raise a question at the end, we'll stay, and some of the other students are usually quite interested. So I'm not saying do it every time, but if that's your experience of law, do it. And
find opportunities. Fantastic. And we all take it as a great compliment when our students want to discuss something with us.
It's nice, yes.
Thank you so much, Gillian. That's been a wonderful insight into different aspects of your varied career and what our students need to make the most of what they have in place already and the skills that they already are developing here. So we have a question from our Q&A, and this question is on artificial intelligence, Gillian. Could you give us your opinion on how artificial intelligence affects the role of a policy lawyer, particularly after the relatively recent announcement by the judiciary on the role of AI?
Well, I think whoever asked that question, it is a very good question, because if you'd asked about AI a couple of years ago, it would not be the developing area of problems. So I've already referred to doing lots of work and a lot of writing. So quite interested in the Second World War, some Holocaust stuff. So I write short articles. So sometimes I will stick things in to see what comes up on AI, and it can be very useful. I save myself a lot of time because I found a lot of inquests in a particular point without actually having to do research. But I then couldn't rely on that, because I have also used AI on one occasion, and it was great. It came up with the Scots law statute fine, and then it decided to forget its place and go into English law. And the English law does not apply in Scotland at all, not one bit. So if you copied that, you were going to be down a minefield. But the first bit was totally accurate. So AI is great as long as you double check it, okay? It's very good, so I don't want to underestimate it. But what's happening in the courts is that AI is developing its own cases, and these cases don't exist. So I wouldn't say never use AI for a bit of research, but for goodness sake, don't rely on it for assignments. Go and double check, do the work. But it can, a bit like learning to search Westlaw, it can work. But I think the future is going to be interesting, because obviously, as you know, and as we know, and I think Francine Ryan and Liz Hardy, who are both involved in this area, it's developing so much that we're, all we can see when we see something wrong is it looks like gobbledygook. It just doesn't look right. It's hard for us to tell you why it doesn't look right, but it doesn't look right and it doesn't make sense. So AI's got its place. Be careful of using it, but I think it has its place. But goodness knows where in 5 years' time you'll all be with AI. But certainly the judiciary is making announcements. And what I suppose judges don't want to have to do is double check every case reference. But and truth be told, just like we should be doing on all your assignments, if we don't already know it's Donahue against Stevenson, we should actually be double checking all case references. So it's not really that different from before. But of course, it's there. The other thing is obviously AI is being used for things like, for Copilot. And I've seen that working in minutes. And I was telling Vonette that I'd seen it in a formal minute where they completely wrote gobbledygook for something I'd said, because clearly the AI, the Copilot could not work out what I'd said in the context. And that threw up as the only word for it was nonsense. So that can happen to your work too. So just watch it. But it's obviously got a future. It may save you some time and research, but I would double check what it shows up by way of research as well with your normal legal skills.
A really great question. And I've enjoyed that insight, but also I think everybody here has taken on board that important warning. Thank you, Gillian. I think we have a brief moment. If there's any more questions, we could take a quick one in the question and answer box. Is there anything else? And if not, we can always get to your questions on Law Study Home. So thank you so much, Gillian, for sharing so much from your exciting and varied career and some really poignant examples. So we have some further resources for our students. These include specific resources on your Law Study Home website, where you can get information as well as advice directly related to careers once you have your law qualifications. There are guides, there are online resources, there are tools, there's advice. There's also some activities you can engage in, such as the career planning guide. You can book onto a workshop, and there is some CV artificial intelligence to help develop your CV and to develop your interview skills as well. And of course, you can always make an appointment with a careers consultant. And that facility is available to our students for up to 3 years after you graduate. We're happy to provide you with continuous tools, resources, events, and consultations. There's also some further resources such as building your career with confidence and how to navigate your future activity pathway. And we're going to end on an important note of encouragement that our OU students are something special. So you can do this, and Gillian has seen that within you and is really an alumnus from our university as well, who shows that it can be done. So before we sign off this evening, just a reminder, please do complete our feedback on our Bringing Law to Life sessions. And once again, a big applause to Gillian. Thank you so much for a really excellent presentation, full of humor, thought-provoking, hard-hitting as well. And I think all our students listening right now and to the recording will find this invaluable. Thank you so much, Gillian, for joining us. And good evening, everybody. Enjoy the